If you're here this morning and you're suffering, you need healing, pay attention to what he said, because there's keys there that will unlock some of the doors for you. What picture do you see in your mind, in your heart, when you say, my God? How do you see God when you call him your God? Because that'll be a picture of your faith. If you see God as a judge sitting on a throne, waiting to press the button to annihilate you, that tells about your walk. If you see God as a kindly old man that always has a pocket full of candy, that's going to be a part of your faith walk. How do you see God when you say God? What's the picture? What does it mean? When you leave church on Sunday mornings, where do you put God? Do you leave him here until you come back? Or do you put God on a shelf? Or do you put God in your Bible? Or do you just put God somewhere back there? Where do you put God when you leave here? What is your attitude toward him? How much input does he have in your life on a daily basis? I'm talking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Not just Sunday. Because how you say, my God, that is a picture of the relationship that you have with him. God, more than anything, wants to bless you and wants you to have the very best that he has to offer. 2 weeks ago, we started this message on Providence. And we used the book of Esther. Because in Esther chapter 2, verse 22 says, but Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. The book of Esther is jam-packed full. It is a library within itself of providence. And in case you were not here a couple of weeks ago, or if you've forgotten, the dictionary defines providence as exercising foresight or divine guidance or care or divine intervention. So when we look at all of this that we're going to look at with that definition in mind, I hope it gives you a little bit more insight to God's desire and God's wish for you. We know the story of Esther. I'm not going to go back over all of that. She was chosen queen because she won a beauty contest of the most beautiful women from 127 provinces throughout that land, stretching from India to Ethiopia. Another question that I have is, why was Mordecai present at the right place at the right moment to hear an assassination plot that was being hatched by two of the king's chamberlains? Another question that I have, why was the king on this particular night sleepless, so that he called for the book of Chronicles, the Chronicles of the Kings? And when the reader came in with the book of Chronicles, it just happened to open to the very page where it was recorded of Mordecai's intervention that we just read about. There is a pattern to all of this, and my question to you is, who designs it? God moves providentially, and we covered this a couple of weeks ago. God is a God who intervenes, who steps into your life providentially, working unseen, behind the scenes, accomplishing his divine purpose in you and through you. You know, I got to thinking not long ago, and I was kind of peeved. Y'all never get peeved. I'm the only one that does that, and I know it. Because I'm writing down 77, doing 77. Well, that's what the sign said, 77. So I was being obedient. And suddenly we stopped. I'm very close to home, just below the Chester exit. And I'm sitting there going nowhere. And then I find out there's been a wreck. Then I find out that the highway, the interstate is closed. And by the time I find out that there's a way around it, I'm past that way around it by 100 feet. I'm thinking I could cut through the grass if it wasn't for that big ditch and the post. And all the way around. I finally got up to the Chester exit at Highway 9. We went down and hit 901 and went around, or Porter Road or whatever it is. And finally got around. Took 4.5 hours. Do you understand why I'm peeved? But I got to thinking, what if I'd have been 10 minutes quicker? When those trucks had that accident, I could have been right in the middle of it. But instead, I was where I was. You know why I was where I was? Because I got behind the slowest person in Columbia. And everybody was going past me, and I couldn't get around her. Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a her. Doing 45 at 5 o'clock in Columbia. I prayed, God bless her, that she'd get out of the way. But if it had not been for her that made me late, there's no telling where I would have been. You know, sometimes we don't know those things. If I hadn't had to slow down back there, I would have been to this stop sign right about the time that that person run that stop sign. And what would have happened? That's God's providence. Missionary named Shaw. Long story. I'm not going to go through it the way I did last time. Took every bit of the money that he had, went to Africa. He had a desire to preach in this one area. He felt like God was calling him to that place. And he goes there and he was not received well. As a matter of fact, they refused to hear him. And he did everything he knew to do, but nothing worked. So heartbroken and out of money, he buys a little cart, puts his newly wed wife in that cart, and they start traveling. And they travel 300 miles, 37 days, praying and seeking God. No doors were opening. Nothing was happening. He said, God, I know that you called me to Africa. I know that you planted me here. You want me here. Why are all the doors closing? Then they stopped to rest. And when they stopped to rest and have just a little bite to eat, they look over and there's a group of bushmen that are over there. And the bushmen were curious. So they came over to the strangers to find out why these white people are in their land. And as they begin to inquire, they begin to understand that these were missionaries. And they said, what a gift from God. Because we're from one of the island groups, island tribes. And we've been sent by our people to find a missionary to come and tell us about God. Had they been an hour earlier, they would have missed those bushmen. If they'd have been an hour later, they would have never seen them. Someone guides those things to perfection. Things just don't happen without a plan or a purpose. Joseph stood at the head of the Egyptian ministry of agriculture. His brothers standing before him, not knowing who he was, but they began to acknowledge their wrongdoing to their brother so long ago, and how God's hand must be upon them now. And they're being tried. All these small events that were involved for this moment to happen. Imagine all the things that led up to this moment. The brothers out abiding the sheep, and his father asked him to go to them instead of sending a servant. They were sitting talking about the dreamer just about the time he gets there. They're upset. They were angered. So they grabbed him, put him in a pit. Then they ate lunch. They were going to kill him, but they looked up and some Ishmaelites were just going by right at that moment. They decided, hey, we can get some money out of this. Let's sell him. So they sold him to the Ishmaelites who were going to Egypt, that were in that area, that had no business being in that area. And they didn't need some boy tagging along with them. But yet all of these pieces came together to get Joseph down to Egypt, so that years later his brothers could come and he could save the entire family. Oh, I could go into the butler and the baker and the candlestick maker and all of those. What I'm getting at, and I want you to see, is point number 2. God moves in small things. Sometimes we don't think it's important unless it's huge. But God's not always in the fire or the tornado, the wind. Sometimes it's that still small voice. The cynic can say, oh, this is a coincidence that this happened. Or this is some kind of happenstance. When we read our word, we begin to understand that the incident was necessary for the results. When we look at the life of Joseph, the critic would say all of those things were just happenstance and coincidence. He would have never got to Egypt had they not been there. And God's plan was to get him down to Egypt. You can't have it both ways. Either God's in charge, or there's coincidences that are meaningless. There's chance. I choose to believe that God's in charge. And that God is just as much a God of the little things as he is the big things. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 10:30, the very hair of your head are numbered. And everyone that falls out, God knows and takes notice of it. You mean the hair? Yeah, God took notice of me about 6 times this morning when I was brushing my hair. Because they were... You know what he said? Oops, there goes another one. You cannot break the chain of events and have the same end results. It means that if you dissect any little bit of history at any time throughout history, you begin to find the providence of God right there, right in the middle of it, in the minutest details. He works in all those little details so that the whole can be completed. Why is that important to us sitting at First Assembly of God? Because it means that God has a hold on your life and that God is directing the events around your life. Jeremiah 10:23, I know, O Lord, that a man's way is not within himself, nor is it in a man who walks to direct his own steps. I read the same truth in Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. It lets me know that God's going to have the final say. that God can contain you or me. Just as long as you might, or in the same manner as you might cage a canary, God can cage you if he needs to. He can contain you if he needs to. Circumstances are as real as anything you've ever seen. Listen, Theodore Roosevelt did his utmost to avoid the vice presidency. Theodore Roosevelt did not, Teddy, for those of you who don't know him, he wanted to return to the governor's office. He loved being the mayor of New York, or the governor of New York. He loved that. He believed that it was a better power base than being the vice president. You go into the vice presidency, you get lost. Nobody knows about you. So he believed that the power was in the governor's office of New York. He didn't want to be obscure. Leaders of the party, McKinley and Hanna and Pratt, they literally forced him into that vice presidency. They wanted to keep him under their thumb because he was almost uncontrollable. Instead, they vaulted him to the presidency because McKinley was assassinated. And then the vice president stepped up and took over. So we had one of the greatest presidents that the United States has ever had in Teddy Roosevelt. Don't fight what you can't win. And you can't win over God. If God is moving by his providence to put you in a position of blessing, don't fight that. Because point 3, God moves in punctuality. He's always on time. He's never late. He's never behind. That is something to observe. God keeps time with himself. Read the story of Philip in the New Testament, the evangelist. There was no communications like we have today. And if there were, it could not work out the split timing that the Spirit of God worked out. Acts chapter 8, verse 26 through 29. And the angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south to the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. It's kind of like the Holy Spirit saying, go down Highway 5 till you get to the big oak tree, then turn left. On his way, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official, the Bible says. This man had been in Jerusalem to worship. And on his way home, he was sitting in the chariot reading the book of Isaiah. And the Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Only God could have arranged that schedule. And the result is history. In another situation, when Muhammad was fleeing from his persecutors, he hid himself in a dark cave. A spider was there in the cave. And when Muhammad went in there, he disturbed that spider. And the spider quickly put a web over the entrance of that cave. The pursuers came by. They looked. They saw the spider's web. They said nobody could be in there because the spider web has not been disturbed. So they went on. One spider made a difference. Robert the Bruce, and I like him. If you've never read about Robert the Bruce, you need to read about Robert the Bruce. He had been defeated 6 times. He was not a real good leader in battle. Well, he was kind of like me. I lost my first 5 fights before I ever won one. And then it was because the guy was so much smaller than me. You're a hard group this morning. I don't know what y'all had for breakfast, but don't have it anymore on Sunday. Loosen up. Six times he had been defeated in battle. He had fought England. He had pushed on England. Get out of our country. He was Scottish. England was overlords. He wanted freedom. They decided they were going to do away with Robert the Bruce. So they began to chase him. And he did a little disappearing act and went to a wayward little farm house and found the barn and went in it. Above him, a spider was trying to throw herself over to one of the beams. And she would throw herself and not quite make it, and she would be dangling on her web and climb back up. And she would throw herself and she wouldn't quite make it 6 times. Wow. 6 times she failed. Then on the 7th time, she succeeded. Sitting in that barn, hiding from the British, Robert the Bruce said to himself, I will try once more. And the result was Bannockburn, where he triumphed and won independence from Britain for the Scottish nation. The unbeliever would call that fate. Let me tell you something. Fate is blind. You call something fate, you are calling something that's blind. But Providence has eyes. Providence has purpose. God is in charge of purpose and providence. Providence is Romans 8:28, where it says all things working together for good to those who are called of God and who love Him. Things do not just occur because they must occur. Who's in charge of history? God. History just doesn't happen. God's in charge of history. Things occur because there's a sufficient reason for them to occur. And who decides that there's a sufficient reason? God and only God. You're not born under some lucky star. Boy, I'm lucky. No, you're blessed. That doctor looked at me when he was telling me about the blood clots that had gone through my heart, and he said, "You're a lucky man." I said, "No, I'm blessed." God was in this thing. God knew what he was doing. And I don't believe in lucky stars. I believe in the bright and morning star, but not lucky stars. That's a cereal. Even the thoughts of men are under the sovereignty of God. You think you're a free thinker. Listen, it was announced the intention of God that Jesus should be born in Bethlehem of Judea at an appointed time. Suddenly, Mary, who lived in Nazareth in the north, had to go to Bethlehem. Why did she have to do that? Because some tyrant that lived in Rome decided that everybody had to register and pay a little extra taxes because the coffers were getting a little low. So everybody go back to where you were born. Joseph just happened to be from Bethlehem. So they had to go from Nazareth, where he had a woodcraft shop, back to Bethlehem. All of this happened so that they arrived at an inn that was full just about the time the baby was going to be born. Ooh. Caesar didn't know it, but God handled his thoughts just like he had the king in the book of Esther. And Mary, she made it just in time for the fullness of time to take place. And Luke chapter 2 verses 4 through 6 said, "So Joseph went up from Nazareth to Bethlehem to register with Mary, who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born." The providence of God is universal. It reaches everywhere. Isaiah 59:1 says, "Surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save." There's one thing you should avoid. Never bet against God. Ever. Have you ever been in a place, or maybe you have one in your home, where there's a picture or a portrait, and everywhere you go in that room, the eyes follow you? And you get that do-do-do-do-do feeling? You can't lose God. Because any place you go on this earth, he's watching. He sees. You're never alone. He'll never leave you alone. He'll follow you. David had moments when he tried to lose God. He did everything he could to get away from God. But he discovered what Adam discovered many centuries before. And he writes about it in Psalms 139, 7 through 13. "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, yet you shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." And I'm going to close with this. See, it's the province of God. We've got 9 minutes left. I got here right at this point. How lucky you are. God moves to meet you at the point where you are. Go wherever you like. Run as hard as you want to. When you get there, you'll see God. I remember years ago, one of the scientists wrote, we got our most expensive telescope and we looked into the heavens, but we didn't see God. You know why? Because he couldn't look far enough. Just a little bit further and God would have been there. Had the astronauts carried a magnificent telescope with them to the moon and looked across space, they would have seen that God was there long before they ever got there. You can go down to the slums, you'll find God there. Go to Skid Row, you'll find God there. Go to the mansions, you'll find God there. There's no place on this planet that you can get away from Him. There was a man named Mungo Park. I know that's a weird name. We studied about him when I was in Bible college. He was a Scottish explorer. He had been robbed, stripped, and left for dead in the Sahara Desert. As he was laying there baking in the sun, his eyes fell upon a little bit of moss. He reached for it and slowly began to examine its beauty. And he realized, for something to be that beautiful in a place so desolate, that God must be there. And that was the thought he had. The hand of God is here. I am not alone. Though I call and no human ear can hear, only the jackals answer with their yelp. Yet God is here. And he said, call on me and I will answer. That little bit of moss led him to his survival because it was the hand of God. It's God who greets the bride when the preacher is still talking. It's God who sees the baby before the doctor ever delivers it. It's God who knows that child more than the mother when it's placed into her arms. It's God who stands with the dying when they slip their hand in His and it's time to cross over. It's God who waits patiently for that wayward heart to come back home. You want to see beyond Providence, but your reasoning cannot get you there. You want to understand God's hand moving beyond Providence, but your thinking, your reasoning can't get you there. God is too big. God is at work, and He can do anything. You want to know why good things are happening or bad things are happening. You can't understand it all the time because it's God that's in charge. There are appointments of God. For me and you to be at certain places at certain times. And God has already placed there something that we are to intersect with. That's called His providence. And when we get there and everything turns out so beautifully, the only answer you'll ever know is Him. He's the one. He designed this. Oh, you can't think of reasoning. It'll fail you. But you can walk by faith, knowing that the steps of a righteous man or woman are directed by God. How many think I'll walk my own way in my own time? How many feel like I'm in charge of my life? I did this. You want to go it on your own? Then you go without His hand of blessing upon you? Not me. Not a chance. The providence of God is an integral thing. It weaves together with the finest thread all the mosaic masterpieces of all of history. Joseph brought his 2 sons to his aged father, and we've been studying it on Wednesday nights. Jacob was blind at the time, and Joseph wanted him to bless his sons. So he positioned Manasseh just right, and he positioned Ephraim just right. And suddenly God intervened, and the hands were crossed, so that the great blessing would go to the younger, and the lesser blessing would go to the older. Jacob blind, but his heart was not blind. Jacob's eyes could not see, but the Bible says his hands moved knowingly. In other words, God was in charge of them. Joseph said, no, not this way, Dad. Let's do it the other way. Uncross your hands. And he would not, because the will of God told before the boys were ever born where the blessing would go. Sometimes, now listen to me, because I'm putting a bow on this thing. Sometimes God blesses with crossed hands. And you think, I should have got that blessing. And if you're not careful, it will sour down inside of you. Why are they being blessed and not me? If you're not careful, that sourness will rise up in you, and it'll become bitterness. And bitterness is an emotion that has roots that affects everything else in your life. God says, I must bless this way, for my blessing is held in my hand. Oh, you'll get your blessing. It will come abundantly. But God will bless His way in His time, when it's best for us. Listen to this. I do not know why often round me my hopes all shattered be. Though trial come through passing days, God's perfect plan, I cannot see. But someday I'll understand. Those trials, they come as days go past. My life will still be filled with praise. For God will lead through darkened ways. And someday I'll understand. Someday He'll make it plain to me. Someday when I His face shall see. Someday from tears I shall be free. For someday I shall understand. I don't know where you are right now, but God does. I don't know what you're facing right now, but God does. I don't know what you may be feeling right now, but God does. Until that day when we understand, can you walk by faith? Your greatest dreams can come to pass when you step out and walk by faith. There's a little story that I just want to share, if I may. Won't take but another minute. Herschel Ford tells a story that many years ago, there was a preacher in England who saw an area of the country that had no voice. So he pitched his tent in that area because there was no church, nothing. Each night he preached the gospel. And one of the first converts was a little boy whose mother was dead and whose father had the biggest saloon in town. After the boy was saved and his conversion had rooted, he began to plead with his father to attend services with him, but the father cursed him and said, "You can forget that. I'll have no part with God." On Saturday night, the little boy, when he was in service, said, "Please pray for my daddy. I want so much for him to be saved." On Monday, someone told this man that his son had requested prayer for him. When the little boy came home from school, the father said, "If you want to be a Christian, you can go ahead, but leave me out of it." The next Saturday night, the boy's heart was breaking for his father. So again, he asked prayer for his dad. Again, on Monday, someone told his father, hoping that it would touch and convict his heart. But when the boy came home, the man in a drunken rage beat his son until the boy's blood stained his shirt. The man threw a bucket of water on him, kicked him, and left to go to work at the saloon. The little boy stumbled to his knees and climbed to his bed, sobbing. That night, the father came home. And as he reached the candle light of the front of his house, he saw the blood stains on his shirt. And he remembered what he had done. Suddenly a feeling of sorrow came over him. He remembered the beating. He remembered the blood. So he went in and he slipped into the little boy's room, and the little boy was still crying and sobbing and tears coursing down his cheeks. That father fell on his knees, said, "Son, I'm sorry for what I did. I'll never do that again. Are you really a Christian?" And the little boy replied, "Yes, Daddy, I am." And that father said, "Can you pray for me?" He said, yes, Daddy, I can. I've learned to pray a little bit, and I think I can pray for you. He said, after all I've done, as many times as I've hurt you, can you really pray for me? He said, yes, Daddy. So he climbed out of bed and got down on his knees right next to his dad. And the boy began to pray, dear Lord, save my daddy. I want him to be a Christian. Suddenly there was torrents of tears that came from the dad's eyes. And that man began to sob as his son prayed for him. When the prayer was over, the dad said, son, can you tell me how to become a Christian? And that little boy began to explain. He himself had only been a Christian 2 weeks. But he began to explain all about how to be a Christian. When they came from their knees, that man was changed. He walked over in a corner and picked up an axe. And they walked down to the saloon. And he began to break up everything that was in that saloon. He chopped up the bar, and he began to break every bottle of whiskey that was in the house. He destroyed the tables and the chairs that were there, chopped them to pieces. Then he and his son walks out. And he walks down to the preacher and hands him some keys and said, that saloon is yours now. Use it any way you please. That building is still in that city today. And it's still a church. It's the oldest church in that area of England. That dad became the leader in that church, not the pastor, but he became the leader and made sure that all the needs were met and that house was kept up. Why? Because God had an intersect for him, and Providence came into his life. Listen, God's got everything under control. Bow your heads with me, would you please?